Derek, welcome to the Tales of Leadership, brother. How you doing, man?
Not bad. How are you, Josh?
It's good. I think it's always funny when I always start these podcasts. I basically say the same thing like 5 minutes before that we've just talked about, but I really mean this is that it's an absolute honor to get to connect with you again, and really that's why I love podcasting is because I can go through some of the memories that we had together, and then really figure out what kind of leader that I was when you first met me.
Well, no, thanks for having me on. I've never done one of these before. This will be fun. But yeah, long form discussion. And of course, catching up with you. You're my first real PL. That was super fun. It was definitely a formative experience for both of us.
100% get some of those stories, I'm sure. But before we jump in, Derek, if you could take the time just to provide a quick overview to the listeners of who you are.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So my name is Derik Kearns. I am active duty Army infantry, currently assigned to 3rd Brigade 10th Mountain Division out of Fort Johnson, Louisiana, and I'm pending permanent change of station or PCS to go to the United States Army Sergeant Major Academy, class number 75. I joined the Army, of course, graduated high school, and I've come from a pretty large family, and I'm one of the only people in my generation of my family that did not go to college. And so a couple months after getting out of high school, then 9/11 happens, and it it seemed appropriate at the time, and I don't question it or regret it now. That I mean, as a young man, there's always that thing like if someone shoulder checks you or bumps into you on the street or says something inappropriate to your girlfriend or one of your friends, you're going to take issue with that, and that's pretty petty usually. But these people decided to commit themselves to the extent of taking their own lives to do it, to come all the way across the world to kill U.S. citizens, um, to include potentially one of my friends growing up was on the other side of Central Park from the Trade Center when it got hit. And
Hmm.
so it very much seemed like, well, if they're going to pick a fight, let's go fight. And so I joined the Army in January of 2002. I was initially stationed at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, with 25th Infantry Division. And it was uncommon at the time, and not too many folks that I've run into have had the same experience, where I stayed in the same infantry company, the same UIC, for 3 GWAT deployments, and from private second class through staff sergeant. So I was in the same company from E2 to E6 continuously. And then I went from there to Joint Base Lewis McChord and got my first taste of Striker. And that's its own big rabbit hole right there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've served in leadership positions, from team leader. Started, I guess, my first real glimpse at organizational level or direct level leadership was as a team leader, when the actual team leaders were away on their mid-tour leave. I got a chance or an opportunity to kind of step up in Afghanistan and be the specialist in charge on patrols or in administrative silly things from time to time. And then when we got back from that deployment in 2005, is when I first started. Actually, I had my first fire team, and then I've served in leadership positions in infantry organizations from then on up to this
Wh-
point.
So I didn't know you were in the same unit. I think you have is it God, don't hate me on this. Is it cacti?
Cacti,
Um
that's right. Left hand
okay.
high. Yeah.
I didn't know you were in that same unit. Basically from private all the way to staff sergeant. I think at least from my understanding that's uncommon nowadays, but maybe because of the operational tempo back then it was I guess relatively normal. I don't know.
Yeah, it was very much for me. It was just maybe the way it worked out. It was very a happy accident that whenever it was time for me to re-enlist, we were also luckily on deployment again, and bonuses were tax-free. And it was like, gosh, why wouldn't I re-enlist to stabilize in tropical paradise with the
Yeah.
organization I love? And being in Charlie Company, Ace of Spades, 2nd Battalion, 35th Infantry Regiment, that was an absolutely amazing experience. And anybody who is blessed to be able to be in 3rd Brigade, 25th Infantry, that's a great organization in the regular Army.
I've been in for 16 years now, and I travel all the time for my current job, and I have yet to figure out a way to make it to Hawaii. I'm
Yeah,
gonna find a way.
it's worth it. It's amazing. It's a very tight knit community. It's wild. I mean, you've seen this.
Yeah.
You'll go to a place, you'll be at a place, and then you'll leave, and you'll transition to go to your next assignment, and then you'll meet someone new who had also at some other time been at that same place, and having that commonality is it's wild how small the Army can be.
When you were in that unit and you were kind of growing up from a private to a staff sergeant, you were working through those ranks. You had 3 different deployments. Were any of those like more specifically challenging from like a rank perspective, getting ready for a deployment? Like maybe when you were more of an NCO and there was more weight on your shoulders and you had to train and get your guys ready for the mission?
Yeah, it was culturally the Army was pretty focused at that point.
Yeah.
There was a good, strong, honest impetus that we all pretty well bought into and fed on and used, well or not, or in the healthiest of ways or not. It was, hey, you really got to learn this or someone's going to die. Because we knew before we even got home from our first trip that we were going on another one, and we knew when we were going to go.
Wow.
And so that whole time, and it wasn't even, I hadn't even put on sergeant stripes yet. And I was in a leadership role, and that was very common, and it continues to be, where a leader will punch up in weight, so to say. They'll work above pay grade, and they'll have that responsibility without maybe the benefit of the honest paycheck attached to that responsibility or authority. But it was always, for me, at every level, from sergeant through first sergeant, it was, I've worked above pay grade for a time. And that was always commonly, laterally and vertically, it was understood as that's kind of like the probationary period. But then, like, once you pin, then it's game on. And once you're wearing the appropriate rank that's commensurate with your responsibility level, then you are reasonably expected to understand your duties and responsibilities and execute effectively. And I do feel like it was a hard transition for me to initially wear stripes. Coming from the junior enlisted ranks to become a sergeant and become a functional team leader. And the methods that were employed at that time to encourage me out of my shell and get me to be more vocal and apply a more critical eye to the population that used to be literally my peer group, specialists and privates amongst us. Now I'm a sergeant, or now I'm a team leader specialist, and I have to lead them and I have to hold them accountable. And I have to teach them not just what I expect, but that what I expect is aligned with Army standards and what is needed to actually be functionally combat ready. And they had to, there was a game that my squad leader and platoon sergeant would play with me or at me, I'm not sure which is more appropriate. But if I hadn't corrected somebody for a valid deficiency before PT formation every day, I would get corrected, so to say. And that was how they helped me to apply a more critical eye to my soldiers in the smallest of ways to help them, or help me to understand that my job is directly related to helping them.
I was always curious where one of the things that I absolutely loved about you is you were way more rigid in terms of like PCCs and PCIs. I remember some of the missions that we do, especially at Nogum, you would do a head to toe. One of the missions that kind of stood out to me is when we had to go try to use that Carl Gustav. If you remember, we had that brand new toy and our boss wanted us to go basically set up an ambush somewhere. And so that morning, didn't basically sleep all night. I think it was like 03 or 02 in the morning, doing a 2 standard head to toe inspection, PCCs, PCIs, letting the NCOs, our squad leaders, to kind of follow through to that, but keeping yourself to that same standard. I've been in the Army for 16 years. I feel like an old man now, but I have yet to really see another NCO that had that same level of detail and accountability. And I was always curious where that came from, and I knew it came from your informative years, but I think that's definitely where it sparked.
Oh, absolutely. It was, well, so back in the day, before before shooter's preference,
Yeah.
before Molly and all that flexibility it affords us now, which I believe is awesome. I love nylon, but it's back in the day, everything had a place. Everything,
Mm.
every pocket on the uniform, every pouch in Alice. Yes, I joined in BDUs in Alice before Molly. My first, we got our we got IBAs and Molly Rux Gen 1 before we deployed. And we didn't get plates until we were in Kandahar.
Wow.
And it was like the end of a baseball game, you know, where the kids line up and walk towards each other. And the outgoing unit we were ripping with, they handed us their plates on the way to the plane. And
It's
that's how
crazy.
and that's how we
Wow.
got body armor plates. But it was so like the Alice rucksack, as you know, those 3 external pouches on the outside at the base, there were only certain things allowed to go in those pouches.
Yeah.
Very much in particular, it's very prescriptive, good, bad, or otherwise. But everybody knew this is what you're supposed to have, and there was absolutely no leeway afforded to, creative license. And it was, I don't know if it's a autism or OCD or what, but I latched onto that as a way to help reduce variables and help ensure stuff. I'm not gonna lie, Josh. I tell that story to subordinate leaders around me and all my battle buddies to this day. Me and Lineweber were talking about it at the ball. He's here now as well. He's a first sergeant in N22,
Is he
and
really?
he is.
That
He
is
is hilarious.
crazy.
Yeah, he is still hilarious as well. But we talk about those PCCs where it was, I don't believe I ever checked the same thing, and I never checked everything, and I never checked everybody. But it was always like I expected that by the time I got there, they had done some checking ahead of me, and that by the time I got there was nothing left for me to find, and there always was.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show how much stuff we were being asked to manage at that level. I mean, our understrength platoon, sometimes as low as 17 or 19 personnel, managing a company-sized battle space, that was pretty intense.
So I remember sometimes we would go out on a patrol because we're scripted to. Basically, we had to go on like 2 to 3 patrols a day. Even didn't really matter what the task or purpose was. Go do a presence patrol, and I had to make a conscious decision with Francis and Dr. Jones, all those guys of like, hey, you are now many PLs, so your squad element is a platoon size, and our platoon is now a company. And it got to a point of where we were going on some missions, and I think there were only like 9 people back in our COP at Nalgam, which is absolutely blows me away, but also inspires me from the standpoint is that you guys had that resilience and adaptability to be able to fall in on a company-sized battle space at arguably the heart of Afghanistan. Nalgam is where Mullah Omar formed the Taliban, and I mean that was a very decisive place in Afghanistan to hold, especially during that time.
Yeah, it was. That summer was pretty sporting, and I know you remember this. Is that one afternoon we got the phone call from our friends in the agency,
Yeah,
where they told
I
us
was
like,
telling that
"Hey,
story today.
yeah, yeah, you've got a guy in your ANA counterpart formation in your perimeter who is planning something that you need to be aware of." I'm like, "Oh my goodness!" And like, yeah, it was that I don't so my first deployment was Afghanistan, and we were very decentralized. Lots of so a whole regular infantry unit, regular leg light infantry unit from Hawaii, and we did so many air assault missions that
Mm,
we fast tracked the annual service cycle of the aviation regiment attached to uh, RC South. And so we ended up having to go to GACs, to ground assault convoys with Humvees. And we just spent, it was like 20 days out, 10 days back on patrols. And it was, remote living. And then we go back to Iraq, and tons of infrastructure and all of that kind of support that you see in those large forward operating bases. And then in 2012, going back to Kandahar Army Airfield that I hadn't been to in 7 years, and seeing, like, it was so weird, that dichotomy where it's like the airfield is so big. There's a Nathan's Hot Dogs. There was a TGI Friday.
Yep.
There was all that stuff there. But then we're still where we ended up, out in the middle of nowhere, very, very similarly to 2004, 2005. That was the strangest thing in the world to me, that's how that ended up.
I remember coming into Kandahar thinking, oh, well, this is going to be fun. It's not going to be that bad. And then we got on a CH-47 and we flew off, and within like 30 minutes, you do the low altitude, like, map of the earth. And he did a burst with a chain gun on there. And I'm like, oh, did we just get shot? That was like the first 30 minutes in like actual country. And I was like, oh, this is going to be totally different. And then we went to where I was on brigade staff, or battalion staff, for the very first part. And that was the most interesting thing, at least for me, is me preparing for Afghanistan. I didn't really have a chance to prepare for any of those positions. I came straight out of Ranger School. I went straight to battalion staff, and we immediately deployed, and I was the night battle captain, because I don't think they had a really good fit for me at the time, because they were already stacked with a lot of phenomenal leaders. Some of them I still actively work with. If you remember Frank, he's still in Special Operations Forces. Frank Foss. He's
the gigantic redhead.
Yeah, you remember? You ever watched Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? Cornelius. Yes. He is Cornelius. He's a peppermint farmer.
He was. I remember he was the HHC XO when I was the scout platoon sergeant, and he was always so very incredibly focused.
Yeah,
and he had a very regimented physical fitness regimen, and his eating habits and everything was just so intentional. Everything he did just seemed like he was doing that on purpose, because that's the way he wanted that done. And I was like, well, good for you, sir. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. I will tell you that he has not changed at all, and now he's made other ginger babies that are exactly the same as him. He's creating a race of superior genetic ginger babies. We'll just say that.
But he's got a best of luck to him in all of that. Yeah, it's a worthy endeavor. Vikings, all of them.
So off topic, but for my job, I get to travel a lot. We went to London a couple of weeks ago, and I had a chance to bring my wife, which is crazy. Acquisitions is totally different than the infantry, because I was joking. The first time I went TDY, I was in my uniform, because I was told by my boss, when you travel, you're on the Army's dime, so you wear your Army uniform. And everyone was, making fun of me. He's like, dude, when you go TDY, you don't wear your uniform. You're a major. How do you not know that? I was like, because I've only ever went to war. That's the only time I ever went to TDY.
I'm sure it's a different culture, but it sounds like a hoot. It sounds like a lot of fun to be over there.
It's a blast. And we went to London. I got to go to Glasgow and Edinburgh, and I took like a Scotland tour, and I found out that I have a surname in Scotland, and there is a Macmillan Castle. So what I'm thinking about doing when I retire one day is to go get my family crest guide on flag made and go take the castle as my birthright and just claim it to Western Shores of Scotland.
See how long it takes them to notice, like, what the heck is going on over there? Like,
who's that guy? It's like, this is mine now.
Who put the drawbridge up? Yeah, how's that? What is going on? Yeah, that'll be awesome.
When you went,
go ahead.
No. What were you going to say?
Oh,
When you were going from the light infantry over to mechanized, I'm curious, like that culture shift. What was it like coming in a striker organization?
Right. Yeah. Coming over to Striker from Light. I'm not gonna lie, I had a lot of concerns and apprehension. And all that was born out of ignorance. It was transitioning into Striker. I think one of the biggest cultural shifts I saw or experienced was that, like, say, because I'm just a hothead staff sergeant at the time, and me being me, I'm maybe more direct than is useful at times, or whatever that is. And I I can't even count if I tried. I do remember several different instances where I was politely and kindly pulled aside by somebody and told, "We don't do that here." So I was addressing an issue that I saw in front of me, and I was just addressing it. I was smoking somebody, and or I was chewing someone out, or I was dressing someone down, or I was reading someone the riot act, and yeah, we don't do that apparently. And yeah, I remember it was during the train up, right? We were at NTC, and
Mm.
I'm in. It was with uh, my platoon sergeant at the time was Sergeant Anderson, right, Papa A, and had Lieutenant Highland, and he's an awesome,
He was the
awesome guy.
mortar platoon leader, right? After Mackey?
Yes,
Yep.
yes,
Okay.
yeah, he's awesome. But at the time, you know, probably stress, or me just being me. Um, he was he was doing it. He was acting in good faith, and he was being a good young officer and all that stuff. And I'm just me. And I told him, I was like, he got done trying to tell us how to do things or whatever it was, and I was like, sir, I was like, you can tell me the when, the where, the what, the who. You can tell me all kinds of stuff, sir, but the how, that's my
Mm.
lane. I was like, don't tell me how to run my squad. I was like, you don't have to tell me to do rehearsals. You don't have to tell me to do inspections. You don't have to tell me to do those things. I'm going to do those things. Like, you tell me where to be and when and what we're going to do if you feel like it. I'll be ready, and so will all of my soldiers. And and then he just kind of nodded and walked off. And then I went, and I was eating in my striker because I didn't want to be in that stupid tent in Aruba. And
I don't blame you.
I went, and I was eating with my VC, and he poked his head in the back of the striker, and he started to say it. He was going to do the, hey, make sure you guys do rehearsals before we move out tonight. And I stopped. I had my MRE in my hand like this. And I looked at him, and I was like, sir, we just talked about this. And he's like, sir, we'll be doing rehearsals at 1900 or at, just on the far end of EENT. Okay. If you want to come see rehearsals, we'll be doing those at the far end of EENT to make sure their nods and lasers and everything works. If you want to come see. He's like, okay. But I mean, that was just me at that time being honestly more fiery than was probably useful. But yeah, I mean,
I never. So that's the one thing that I absolutely loved about you, especially when I was a brand new platoon leader. So the first time I met you was at Rod's Memorial. That was the first interaction of the entire platoon. I didn't really know where I was going that day. If I remember right, Colonel Harkins at the time was like, "Hey, that's going to be the platoon that you take over." So my first interaction was at that memorial, and I remember going into that job of having a very like selfish mentality. And I tell this story all the time of like, hey, I wanted to go be a regimental platoon leader. So I wanted to go to war, and I wanted to get into many firefights as possible. But at that moment, like that, there was like a switch inside of me of like, hey, I need to be the leader that this platoon needs, I guess, if that makes sense. So I shifted my mindset almost 110, and you were perfect in terms of like clearly communicating always when I was getting outside the limits. So story, when I may or may not have went to go take a shower in a well, right where we got into a very large ambush a couple days before. You tactily told me, "Hey, sir, this is a bad idea. You will die." I didn't listen to you, but I probably should have. But I remember coming back, and you were standing outside of the entryway. It's like, "Sir, we're getting shot at." So you're not lying. That was hilarious.
Yeah, it was a fun transition. I mean, honestly, you were a huge breath of fresh air because I mean, that platoon had already been through so much, and I was an
Yeah, they were
import.
very war weary.
Yeah, and it was very soon into the trip, and they had so many soldiers. It was their first trip, and they had, I mean, gosh, they had already taken some pretty significant hits, and it was like, I mean, immediately during rip in,
Yeah.
I wasn't even in the platoon yet, and they lost their platoon sergeant, who was beloved by them. He had certainly built quite a cult of personality. He's a
Yeah.
very dynamic leader, and that's fine. And but he had, that, I mean, the circumstances around that incident are not great, but you know, 3 wounded in one hit. I mean, they all lived, thank goodness. And so all of a sudden, like, I was a squad leader that morning, and then at the end of the night, I'm a staff sergeant, platoon sergeant, and I have a captain, platoon leader. And then, we, making our way through things, and then, Sergeant Rod didn't make it, and that was June 19th, I believe.
Yeah.
And then we go to his memorial, and then then you come on board, and then we're kicking west, and we knew that area, Maywan, was that the only people who had been west recently from Dagobah were Navy SEALs, and they had not done well for themselves in that environment. I was like,
I
good,
remember
here we go.
watching that. I was watching that mission, and they may or may not hit an IED. I was like, oh, this is gonna be interesting.
Yeah, so I remember that transition in for you, and I was so worried for you, and I was worried for everybody, and it was because there's only ever one 6. There's only ever one 6 on the net, and I was learning very quickly that no matter how good I thought I was or how good I might have been, usually when someone's calling us, they're not calling for anybody but you. And the hardest thing in the world was to get you to take your radio and your RTO with you, because you just
I was a
take
peacock,
off.
man. I just go.
You just go for it somewhere. And I was like, I'd find your 152 or your embedder, whichever one you're supposed to have that day. You just leave it in the back of the striker, and I was like,
that son of a bitch.
And then your RTO Clifton, Peterson, like, he was just trying so hard to stay with you, or he's like, sorry, I'm trying. And I'm like, no, stop it. It's like, if he leaves this footprint again without his radio, I'm going to kill you. He's like, sorry, it's not my radio. I've got my radio. It's like, no, that's not the point. Yeah. All right. I remember his Sergeant Major Biggs called all of the platoon sergeants from across the battalion battle space back to AZ. And I was like, Sergeant Major, we're in contact every day, repeatedly. I was like, I don't know if I can afford to leave my platoon's position. And, First Sergeant, of course, was adamant. And so Sergeant Major wants a thing. It's what's going to happen. And I felt like I had tried really hard to give, task condition standards and, like, set up a GOTWA or whatever it would be. And I remember I got back off the striker when I got back out there to Maywand, and it was this close to, like, completely going Lord of the Flies.
I remember that.
I was like, what is going on in here? I was like, oh my God, so bad.
McMillian, you ruined it. Yeah, it was totally different personality types. Is that I didn't come from a soldiering background. Really my only interaction was straight academic from a schoolhouse perspective of airborne school, ranger school, IBOLIC, mortar leader school, combatives, and then boom, straight to a platoon, whirlwind for basically 2 months, and then coming in right in the middle of that mission. And when you left, And it came back, and I'm going to blame Jones. I think Jones was the biggest reason that everything,
I
he
mean,
talked me into it.
it's convenient, but it's also completely true. Jones wouldn't even try to deny it either. Jones would completely own it. He's like, yeah, it sucked out there. It's like, you're right. It did suck out there, but putting your helmet on in the tower is not a bad idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially after we left and what happened. You I remember doing one of those patrols, and I'm pretty sure that we found like a sniper, a rubber into the sniper scope for the eyepiece on one of the rooftops out there. And it could have been like when you guys were getting in some of those previous engagements, but I always had in the back of my mind that there was definitely a sniper somewhere there. And I think that was definitely validated after we ended up leaving. But thank God we had Wetlick and his um, hillbilly ingenuity being able to run everything.
I remember we got to Nogam. It was the very first day, and that first sergeant, and he was like the only first sergeant in that organization for the paratroopers that we were relieving who didn't have a tab, and he was well, whatever. He had his way about him, and he's showing me around and all this stuff, which is great. He's trying to play a good host. And he shows us that broken shower trailer, right? It didn't work, and they're like, they had the water blivet, and they were just taking showers standing on a pallet and turning on the valve hose and letting like water just pour out of the blivet through the hose onto them while they stood on a pallet with this broken shower connex next to them. And I looked over at Wedlake and I was like, hey, see what you can do with that. And he's like, okay. And he starts tinkering around. And then we're all talking in the CP, and it was not even a couple hours later. And Wedlake walks in. He's like, hey, Sergeant Kearns. I was like, yeah, what's up, Wedlake? He's like, hey, can I show you something? I'm like, well, is it important? I'm kind of talking. The first sergeant's talking to us. And he's like, oh, you're going to like this. And I'm like, okay. So he takes us out there, and he had figured out how to get it to work. Oh. And we had just shown up that day, and they had been there for months without showers. And the first sergeant was actually very upset with us about that. He did not appreciate that we had made him look bad by getting something to work. And I was like I've never taken those kinds of things into account, I guess.
I definitely I remember that company that we ripped out with. Not saying anything bad about any of them, but I remember one specific example of when we were cleaning out the talk, and I think it might have been Turner. I don't know who it was. Was grabbing some of the files, and we shredded all the files. And one of those files was the CD of all the property documentation for that entire company, like basically complete packaged, ready to go. And then in one moment shredded. But I remember that lieutenant's interaction, just how hostile it was, and like the petty things he would do. If you remember, in the little whiteboard in the back, the day they left, hey, have fun for the rest of your 6 months in Afghanistan. We're going back to the U.S. Like, okay, man, I'm sorry that we ruined your day.
Yeah, it was that. And I truly have nothing against any organization in the Army, but that interaction certainly left a particular impression on me of that larger organization. And I mean, because I've ripped repeatedly. We ripped twice with no slack while I was previously in other deployments, and once with polar bears. And no slack, they were consistently about it. A little wild, but about it. Like, they were very aggressive, and like, oh, okay, yeah, this smells right. This feels like it makes sense. The interactions with the folks we met in Afghanistan did not make me want to ever be there.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. Like that rip that we did really wasn't, I guess, a rip at all. It was interesting because we had to basically completely reinvent all of that to include the relationships. And there was several times, you already mentioned one, where basically that we got a call from the agency for the green on blue threat. But if you remember, I was going out to do a property book inspection in some of those cops or outposts that we had, and I had to check serial numbers for generators. The one day that I did not bring a linguist with me was the one day that they thought I was going out there to steal their generator. And I'll never forget, like, they had a line. They were all outside, and I come, walking out of the striker, like from a little clipboard, and they think I'm going to take it, and they have all their guns drawn at me. And I can't remember who it was on the radio. It's like, sir, we have all our guns pointed at them. So then all of our strikers pointed at them, and I'm like, oh my God, this is not going to end well. But I was able to figure out a way to get that to go away, and then bring the linguist up. Like, dude, all I need is the serial number. I'm not taking away your generator, I promise. But that was interesting.
Yeah, it was strange how something which would seem rhythmic or very normal
Yeah.
had taken on a whole new life because of the preceding unit's focus having been in other areas. The work it gave us to do was pretty significant. I mean, just the fact that, like, I mean, Wed Lake, again, like as an example, like local inside the perimeter, they were, like, say they had a freezer trailer. They had a way to refrigerate and preserve food, so they didn't have to eat those, MREs or MRAs. They could actually cook, and they had a kitchen unit and everything, and then they didn't even know what they had. Like, we were finding steak, and we're finding all this food, and it was like they had dry goods, they had seasonings, they had all these things that they could have been utilizing to help improve their soldiers' lives, or just give them a small taste of humanity. And it just wasn't being put to use. And it was like, wow, you guys have lived like this the whole time on purpose? It's like, wow, that's wild.
I vividly remember that. Like, when we moved to Nogum, I the quality of life just dramatically improved for everyone, to include like the food that we had. We basically had like our own little mini DFAC. We were getting pretty big logistics pushes. And if you remember, I don't know if you remember this or not, I called them fatty cakes. I may or may not have given our guys the fatty cakes, and I gave them to our Afghan partners. So like, oh, hey guys, here's all your muffins and cookies and cakes. And we would always, hey, why are we only getting protein and like vegetables? Like, I don't know. We're just not getting fatty cakes, man. I'm sorry.
I remember we made one of those rare trips, because I really did not enjoy being in the vicinity of the company headquarters. Variety of reasons. But one of the rare trips I did go up there to the company CP. I got a peek inside the company freezer truck, and I just immediately lost my mind and just had the squad leaders just take anything out of there you want, because obviously they don't care what's in there, because it was just thrown in. It was like looking inside a young child's dirty closet. Like, as soon as the freezer door opened, the stuff was spilling out, and there was no organizational system in place at all. It's not just that it wasn't organized, and that hurt my OCD feelings about it. It was that, like, they had things that, even though refrigerated, would still go bad. Like, they had lobster in there, they had steak in there, they had crab legs, they had all of these things that a soldier would love to eat on a deployment, but instead it was just all in piles. And it was like, you don't even know what you have. There's no way you have an understanding of what you have on hand. Like, you don't know your DOS, you don't know like how much you have available, for this UIC or any other. Like, you don't even have a distro plan or anything. It's like, okay, we're just going to take whatever we want, and you're stuck with the rest, because you're obviously not concerned about what you have. And it was wild.
That's one of the biggest traits that I took away from your leadership style, was that attention to detail. And I still carry it to today. Like with some of the programs, if you were to ask me how much money something is, or how long the contract is that we're doing it with, who's the vendor, like just all of those things, I have it very structured in my mind, because I keep detailed notes. I have systems in place. Those systems are repeatable. They're scalable to different jobs. I'm sure you, as a non-commissioned officer, you probably use some of the same trackers that you used as a first sergeant, now as a sergeant major, as you're growing. They're not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but that little bit attention to detail can save you so much work, and it can also improve the organization, because just applying a little bit of thought and brain power can dramatically improve the entire organization for everyone.
Absolutely. And it's, yes, it very much, I've, so I spent a few years as a Ranger instructor, in between, uh, Scout platoon sergeant time, right? So after being the Scout platoon sergeant, I went off to, um, 7th ID headquarters, and this is about the end of 2014. And I was put onto a striker project there at JBLM. And I'm very proud to say that program is still in ATARS today. I created this 3-week program it's called a Striker Leader Transition Course. And so I did that. And then I finally was selected to go be a Ranger instructor at Fort Moore. And that was something I continuously tried to reinforce to Ranger students was attention to detail, not just for the sake of it, but it's all about applying it in a contextually correct way so that it becomes functional. And there's this ongoing endless debate about what is the utility or the purpose of Ranger School in the modern Army. Is it a leadership school? Is it a small unit tactics school? Is it this? Is it that? And it's and I boil it down to the same idea of, like, if you tell a young lieutenant, like, hey, sir, you're going to help facilitate coordinating driver's training, they're going to go nuts and go online and find all these little doodads and PowerPoints and whatnots that people have created.
Yeah.
And they're going to be like, oh, we're going to do these tasks. Or you tell them, like, oh, you're going to organize, your platoon is responsible for certifying through this sticks process on its way to live fire. Or you're going to, let's get some situational training going. And they're just going to go nuts making up weird stuff. And it's like, sir, you have to tell them, it's like, just apply some attention to detail. Remember, you're in a very large, old organization, the United States Army Infantry. And there are documents that you can use to help drive your certification process or your training plan so that you don't have to make up anything. You don't have to be creative. You don't have to sell a pen to your commander or your commander's commander. You can just use, metal, because there's key collective tasks. There are individual critical task lists for every MOS and pay grade. And you can use all of that, if applied appropriately, to both assume risk when needed and to identify focus points or points of friction. And it's been continuously and persistently helpful to be able to be precise in a way that helps as much as it possibly could. Like, say something as simple as knowing Army regulations appropriately and when needed down to chapter verse, not for the sake of being pedantic or semantic, but say as a leader, when acting on behalf of soldiers, like quoting Army Regulation 420-1, in regards to unaccompanied housing or barracks, as it relates to the relationship between, the Housing Management Office, right, who uses the Army Barracks Management Program handbook, all that loaded language. But that's not doctrine. They're supposed to use Army Regulation 420-1. And you'll see it a lot in the Army. I know you saw this as a commander here at Fort Johnson, was soldiers who are unintentionally double booked in a room in the barracks, right? But there's guidance in that regulation that says soldiers who share a room are supposed to have minimum square footage requirements for private space and communal space. And non-commissioned officers in unaccompanied housing are not supposed to have a roommate. And that's written into the regulation. And somehow, not at all isolated to Fort Johnson, but across the whole Army. It's to the point where, I'm sure you saw it earlier this year, all of the branch senior enlisted advisors, say Sergeant Major of the Army and all of his counterparts across all the branches, were testifying before Congress about quality of life issues in the enlisted side. And high hopes they can fix it, but it's crazy how all this is at our fingertips. And then, what do we do with it?
That's an excellent point. And I think it goes back to like one of your strengths is your attention to detail and your understanding of regulations and policies, and not from like what you just said, not from a standpoint of trying to make someone look less intelligent, but understanding regulations and policies make you dangerous. Because if someone were to tell you something and you already know, well, nope, that's not true. Show me, and the policy or the regulation that says that we need to do this way, and it doesn't. So we're not going to do it that way. And it allows you to make better informed decisions. At the end of the day, doing what a leader does, and it's just taking care of the sons and daughters who wear this uniform. I feel that were either the best ranger instructor or the absolute worst to have because of your superpower. So I'm curious what your take is on that.
Yeah, I enjoyed being a ranger instructor so very thoroughly. It was so much fun, unadulterated fun for me. I felt like a kid in a candy store every day. It was because at the time, this was about the summer of 2017 through all of 2021.
Yeah.
And so I reported to 4th RTB as a KD, or now CD complete, Sergeant First Class. And so I was among the older of the population as an instructor. 4th Ranger Training Battalion at the time was conducting training at the squad level. They had not yet transitioned to what the current model is, which is platoon operations throughout the curriculum.
Interesting. It was squad when I went through.
Right. So squad ops at Darby was normal for me as well. And having 13, 14 on the low end to 18 is the ideal max for a Ranger squad in Darby phase. And having them for a 24-hour period, that was the most fun. But it was an opportunity to see growth in motion, because you would see these same students for 3 continuous weeks, pretty much all the way from RAP week all the way through patrol cycle. And you could see them either come together or tear themselves apart. And I got to participate in the front end of patrols. You give classes, so the progression is a classroom period of instruction, and then a ungraded practical exercise led by a certified ranger instructor, and then a student-led patrol graded by a ranger instructor, evaluating ranger students on execution of leadership tasks in a tactical environment. And so at the end of the phase, the students write critiques before they go to mountains, the end of phase critiques. And there are things in there where it's a very fill in the blank kind of a 1-page sheet. And there are questions like, are there any ranger instructors who stood out to you? Or are there any periods of instruction that need to be changed or improved, and things like that? When I did come up, it would tend to be that I would give, Sergeant First Class Kearns gives excellent classes, but then Sergeant First Class Kearns is horrible to have when you're being graded, because he's very thorough when he grades as well.
Yeah.
But it was.
There's a standard.
Yeah, and
You're graded to that standard.
Very impartial, and it was. I mean, I would tell them all the time. It's like at Darby phase, I would tell them, I'm not certifying you as a ranger. I'm certifying to my counterparts at Mountain phase and Florida phase that if I was your platoon sergeant, and you were one of my squad leaders leading one of my squads on a combat patrol, I wouldn't want to kill you.
Yeah.
I could deal with you and develop you if I needed to, but like, you are a leader who is making sound decisions under duress. And it was a really awesome experience with a really great population there. I don't know, easily some, not all, of course, not all, but some really excellent non-commissioned officers and commissioned officer leaders. It was a good time.
I always kind of regret that now, the transitioning to acquisitions. I can never go back into any of those roles. And the one thing that I missed most out of anything is just spending time with soldiers. That is the one thing that I wish I could find more time of, because stuff that I'm doing now is extremely impactful. But being able to give back, especially time and mentorship to young soldiers, is the one thing that I wish I could find more time or a way to do. 100%. So I would have loved to have been an RI, but unfortunately, I can never go back to do that. So
It's, I mean, it's certainly one of the only reasons I'm still in, if not the only. I mean, because you say you're at 16 years. I'm at 22.
yeah,
I'm exceptionally old.
you need to stay in though. I would tell you that the Army needs more leaders like you. And if I had my way, you would be the sergeant major of the Army. So
I just kind of keep putting it where I've never sought a job or a promotion. I just kind of keep doing whatever job I have until someone comes
yep.
along and tells me I have another job. And luckily, the trend has been upward. It's so I was actually slated to leave 4th RTB at the end of 2019, and I'm sure you remember First Sergeant Hare,
Yeah.
right? So he's now Sergeant Major Hare, and he was the incoming um, command sergeant major for 4th RTB at that time. And he remembered me, and he asked, he's like, do you want to stay? And you'll be the HHC first sergeant. I said, well, yeah, sure, that'd be great. Thank you, Sergeant Major. And then, so that finally all came to a close, and I come over here to Fort Johnson, and then Sergeant Major Siglock.
Yep.
So he was first sergeant Siglock with us on that trip, and so he's here now as the brigade command sergeant major, and he
it's like
was
we
an
all
ambush.
gravitated to the same duty station.
Yeah, it was, and it's been great. He's awesome to work for. I've learned so much from him. But I went to work in Alpha Company 2-2, just like it was a normal day. It was after PT. I'm in my office, and then the battalion sergeant major just comes in, beelines into my office, and closes the door on me. And I messed something up. Someone die? Was someone in jail? Like, what happened? Because Sergeant Major Absher you'd come in and everything's fine,
Yeah.
He closed the door right away, and he's like, Kearns, sit down. I'm like, oh my God. He's like, Sergeant Major, is everything all right? And he's like, Kearns, sit down, be quiet. I'm like, okay. And he's like, you're not fired, but you're leaving. And I was like, it sounds like I just got fired, Sergeant Major. And he's like, no, you're not fired, but you do need to go right now, and you need to go to brigade headquarters and meet your new counterpart. You start tomorrow. I was like, what? He's like, Sergeant Major,
Wow.
I'm pretty sure I just got fired. And he's like, no, Kearns, shut up. You didn't get fired. You got a promotion. I was like, and it took me a few months to understand. And we were so close. Like, we were this close to going to the box. Like, done the whole train up cycle. And it was about 2 weeks out from the JRTC rotation for the brigade. And I had been with this company all the way through the progression of the training cycle. And all of a sudden, I'm now leading the brigade headquarters company. And I felt terrible for my counterpart at brigade, Captain Marilyn Ponder. She's awesome. She's up in Alaska now. But I was her fourth first sergeant in her one command at the brigade headquarters company.
Oh, wow.
And she had to try to keep that all together by herself.
Were they not that? So when I was in there, that was definitely a coveted position. Because I was a HHC commander in 2-2. So I started off Alpha Company, Wolf Pack, and then took over Hawk Company. But I always, the HHC Brigade was always the most challenging company command position, but also one of the most rewarding from a career perspective. Is that when you got that, you were number one.
Yes, that is. I'd say that assessment is still in place. Yes. Okay. So Sergeant Major Siglock's lens on it is the last three of the last four first sergeants who have been the HHC Brigade first sergeant have gone immediately to the academy.
Okay.
And so it's like I'm going to be signing my evaluation from headquarters company like this week, and the Army saw me slotted in that position before the board closed out and published OML numbers for the academy while I was there, but I still don't have in my IPERMS evaluation for being the HAC Brigade First Sergeant. It's just being there, being slotted in that bracket.
Was I got to ask you, when you were the Alpha Company commander, were the doors still black and were there wolf logos painted on them?
They are. So it's all still that way. It is still the Wolfpack, and headquarters company is still Hawk Company. We added a quote.
Death is coming.
Well, so that has stayed in place. That's still there. We added a quote to the wall of the back of the coff. It was from the Medal of Honor winner, Staff Sergeant, when 2-2 was under First AD or ID, excuse me, Big Red One, and it was, the quote to paraphrase was, "If you seek to make war on the United States of America, just know that someone else will raise your sons and daughters." I was like, yeah, I can get behind that.
Yeah, that's the most savage quote. That was awesome when I found out where he came from. I was like, oh, that's it. He was a ramrod. That's pretty epic.
Yeah, so we put that quote on in very large letters and spray paint on the side of the coff, and the Wolf Company's still doing very well. It's a good crowd there. I contend the limiting factor for 3rd Brigade 10th Mountain Division is certainly not the people or the leaders in the organization. It is the geographic dislocation from their higher headquarters and that infrastructure and support that comes with being co-located with your 2-star.
Yeah, 100%.
But I contend it's a good crowd.
Yeah, that was always a struggle being in 310, is that you had 2 daddies, if that made sense. So you had to answer to JRTC. You were the easy button when rotations came through in terms of taskers, but you also still had to maintain the same standard of an 18th Airborne Corps rifle company and under 3rd Brigade. That was, I think, one of the more challenging locations to kind of command, just because of the different burdens, because you're right at a JRTC rotation. So the ability for you to get tasked, I can't remember. I was a JRTC instructor before I took over command. I think I did 26 rotations, and I hope, yeah, I know, right? I hope I never see that place again, just in the nicest way possible.
Yeah, it was, so of all the CTC rotations I've done, the JRTC rotation I did 2309 with the brigade headquarters. That's the only rotation I have at JRTC, except for we were augmentees once. Wolf Company augmented Geronimo once, which was honestly, that was a great experience. It was a good chance to demystify small unit tactics and reinforce the importance of all of my favorite things, noise and light discipline, and the PCCs and PCIs and all that fun stuff. It was a great chance for our team leaders and squad leaders to get a chance in the field with their soldiers in a relatively low stress environment, because we were the bad guys really out forward. They really didn't worry about us too much. It was just like, this is a chance to flex your mental muscles at this organizational level, and we can turn this into a sticks lane. It's just force on force sticks with a thinking opponent. But it was pretty awesome. All of my other CTCs have been through NTC. I am entirely too familiar with Wales Gap. It was horrendous.
Yeah, that place stinks. I just remember being in Mop 4 in July or August, the last rotation when I was in XO, and just thinking, this is just the worst place in the world. The Army chooses the worst place for training centers. I guess there's a reason why they do it, because it was horrible.
Yeah, it's a relatively low developmental value, or like low, they perceive it. The state that leases that land to the federal government perceives it as very low yield, as a tax income producing or an income producing location. Like, they're like, yeah, no one's going to develop this land, so you guys can use it.
So what's next? So Sergeant Major Academy. When are you coming to DC? I'm going to be here for a hot minute, so you need to come to DC.
As much as I would love to go down all of the rabbit holes, like I would love to, like you said, like this learning about all the technical aspects about, emerging technologies, growth markets, the cutting edge of, you know, how we're going to fight the next fight effectively. That
Yeah.
would be amazing. But I have this thing about the Beltway where it's like I don't know that I'm ever going to develop a love of large, overdeveloped metropolitan cityscapes.
Yeah.
Plus the unless I could live, can you okay, so say if I get stationed at the Pentagon, which I have no idea why anyone at the Pentagon would have any interest in me being there, but it's could I live in West Virginia and commute to the Pentagon? Is that
So,
viable?
ooh, you let me research that because I know people live in West Virginia and they do commute. So I would have to think about that. And now from the military standpoint, probably not. But I grew up in rural West Virginia, so I wholeheartedly think that that's a genius idea. Wild and wonderful.
Yeah,
Big, at least an hour and a half, an hour and 40-minute commute, probably one way. Yeah.
that's rough. Yeah, that'd be a long day. But as you know, I'm not very well rounded. I only have so many hobbies, but I'm really into my hobbies. Um, I am unwilling to part ways with my hobbies, so to say, in order to get stationed at a certain place or another.
So I'll tell you this, DC, if you haven't lived here, it's kind of the metro really helps it out. You can live out in the country and still kind of commute into work. I have a lot of my coworkers who live very far out and they live in the very rural parts of the country, but you have to just be willing to commute. That's the issue. Like we live in Fort Belvoir right now, right by the general's housing. So they've already messed up because I wear my Ranger panties outside religiously. I haven't changed my ways at all in my bright green Crocs. Uh, but yeah, it's very close. But I agree with you, man. I miss Fort Johnson. It used to be Fort Polk. I miss that small town kind of feel. It was definitely nice to raise the kids in the season of life they were in. I miss that like small town feel, and you don't get that with where we're at now.
Yeah, it's got its charms. I mean, there's certainly downsides, but I mean, it's because you see it all the time. Someone's like, oh, I'm headed to Fort Johnson soon. What they're always asking for the bad news, right?
Yeah.
Like someone reaches out, or like say in sponsorship, first sergeant, no, I'm headed that way soon. I have a small family, this, that, or the other. What can you tell me about it? And they're always asking for the bad news. They're asking for the diagnosis of cancer in advance, and it's like there are negatives, but I remember being stationed at Schofield, and there were people that would complain about being in Hawaii, and
Yeah, it blows my mind.
I perceive that it's a mindset issue where
Yep.
if you look for the negative, you're going to find it, no matter where you're at. If you look for the positive, you'll find that. There's always going to be something positive. It's just what are you even looking for to begin with?
I love that. I think you're spot on, brother. Is that if we're trying to buy like a Toyota Tacoma, whenever we go out, we'll subconsciously pick up on all the Toyota Tacomas everywhere around us. Like, man, there's a lot of those. And the same as if you come into an organization, regardless if it's in the military or professional organization, the civilian side, with a negative outlook, thinking that this is going to be bad and that you're already looking for the negatives, you're going to have a miserable time. And me and my wife totally did the opposite of that. You're going to hate me. I turned down going to Hawaii after my OCT time to stay and extend at Fort Johnson because the command queue was so small. I could have basically went right into a command. So I turned down PCS into Hawaii, which could have been like maybe my only time in life. But I
I mean,
I
it's
saw the positives.
right, and I mean, there's wow, PCS from Fort Johnson all the way to Hawaii. That's a considerable endeavor. Plus, yeah, I mean, it's a big shift. It's a big move for a family for sure. And that thing about the short command queue, that's totally still real.
Yeah.
So I've had 7 total commanders as a first sergeant, and
Wow.
um, Yeah, so 3 at 4th RTB, 2 and
Uh,
2-2, and 2 at brigade headquarters. And both of my commanders both my counterparts at 2-2 were straight out of the pipeline. They were straight out of Triple C. They had PCS, and they had been told in advance, hey, there's potentially a pretty short queue. But right now, it looks like you're going to spend a little bit of time in staff at the battalion or brigade level, just developing or doing what's needed. And all of a sudden, they're instead of spending that time, um, you know, at that staff position, all of a sudden, like they get that midnight phone call, "Hey, be here tomorrow morning for an interview with your new raider."
mm,
And it was that was I don't know, that was interesting. And then it was for both of the commanders. So that was both commanders at 2-2, and then at brigade headquarters. Normally, it's I mean, it'd be ideal. I don't know if it's really feasible at 310 in particular, but having the brigade headquarters company be a second command position.
yeah.
Because a lot of times those battalion commanders really need that seasoned, excellent captain to be the HHC at their battalion to help keep the house in order, right? But both of the commanders I had at brigade headquarters, that was their first command.
Mm.
And so, yeah, that was its own special fun challenge, was adapting to each new counterpart and then learning them and allowing them to learn me and so on, and just trying to become as functional a team as possible. Try to minimize negative impacts for the soldiers throughout that process.
That's one of the best things I think about the military is they teach us is the adaptability. 16 years now, and for me being a platoon leader all the way till now, I think I've had a total of 10 different jobs. So in a span of 16 years, 10 different jobs, each one was a different scope and duties and responsibilities, some completely, totally different. I was in PO aviation working Army systems architectures and then small drones, two totally different things. And then now I'm doing technical surveillance, and I'm getting ready to take over SOCOM robotics. So it's a huge learning curve. But that's the one thing the military does so well is that they keep you in your discomfort zone. And when you do get ready to transition, a lot of the hardships that like veterans that I've seen in the civilian world just absolutely crush it because things that are common to us that we can kind of work through problem sets are not common in the civilian world. People will stay in a job for as long as possible because they don't want to stretch. But I always think it from the standpoint is that if you feel uncomfortable, I think that's good because that means you're growing. That means you don't fully understand everything. And that means that you care because you feel uncomfortable enough to where you're having like an emotional kind of response to it. I always get anxiety whenever I take over a new job, just like when I got ready to be your PL. I always feel that healthy level of anxiety, but that tells me that I still care. And at the end of the day, that's why I keep doing what I do. One of the last questions there, because I don't want to take too much of your time. I do a final show segment. I call it the Killer Bees. So you'll love it. Be brief, be brilliant, be present, be gone. It's the same 4 questions that I ask everyone on the Tells of Leadership. If you're ready, we'll jump right into it.
Absolutely.
All right. So first question: what do you believe separates a good leader from a great leader?
A good leader from a great leader would be, in my mind, would be investment in because to me, they're the loaded language of leader,
Mm,
contextually with the Army. A leader is specifically associated with the development of their personnel, right? Because you don't lead machines, you use them, right? You employ them, but you lead people. Um, People, you lead them by, you can't lead everyone the same. And a good leader will understand how leadership works. So they'll understand what they're expected to do in their leadership role. But a great leader is going to understand how to get the absolute best in that moment from each of their personnel because they know what makes each of their personnel tick, and that each of their personnel are different, and that's okay. But knowing not just that each of them are different, but they know them well enough personally and professionally to know how to get that extra bit out of them and how to make sure that that juice is worth the squeeze.
That is the best quote I think I've ever heard. I filmed 21 or 81 episodes so far. You use machines, you lead people. It is so simple, and I think extremely effective. Because one of the biggest thing, I'm breaking my rule of being brief. I blame you. Is but in the military, I've seen leaders who adopt a transitional mindset because they only know they're going to be in a role for a year, so they try to use people as machines, I guess is the best way to use them to progress their own career for the next phase. And I've always been of the mindset is that I want to leave the organization better off than I took it. And I've had that same mentality going into every single job. And I attribute a lot of that mindset to you grooming me as a very young lieutenant. And that served me well. And I think that's always had me separate from my peers of like, I'm serving, I'm not being selfish and trying to take away to move. Okay. Second question. What is one resource that you could recommend to our listeners?
I would recommend and always be willing to let people know that you don't know everything. Because if the expectation is that you're the one who never asks a question, and that could be lateral, that could be vertical, but it's be willing to learn as a leader. And that resource is the people around you, whether that's vertically or laterally. And I'm not saying walk into an office or a room and ask someone what time it is rather than look at your watch. I'm saying lean on other people's strengths to develop yours from where they currently are to where they need to be, or understand that you don't know it all and that no matter how much you do know, you could afford to learn some more regardless of the subject. Because the Army, unlike the Navy or the Air Force, like say the people in the Navy, no offense to anybody, but people in the Navy are there to help the boats do their thing. The people in the Air Force are there to make sure the bombs don't fall off the planes in flight too early or too late. The Army is made up of its people, and we are unique in that regard. So the resources, the people around you, because it's not a .com or a .mil or a website. I mean, those are out there, but I mean, Army pubs, I'd say, is the cheap answer. Read. Take the time to read. I mean, how much time do we spend on our phones? You can read, you can download things, and then share it, and then ask questions if you're not sure. When in doubt, over communicate.
Yeah, 100%. Question 3 is if you could go ask back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
I'd say to myself, to my younger self, gosh, if I could go back and tell him one thing, it would be probably to not be scared of college, because not just for the times we live in, because apparently that's something that is going to be addressed in one way or another in the next spending resolution or whatever they do, but it's also that I have taken some college classes, and I was immensely disappointed in the experience, that it was so underwhelming and so easy and so trivial. And I was like, wow, people pay so much money for this. This is ridiculous. And I wish I would have just gotten it done sooner. And at this point in my life, I'm 42 years old. I've been in the Army for more than half of my natural life, and I'm having to face down the dragon of not having an undergraduate degree. And I need to address that. And so I'm going to have to commit myself to completing the curriculum of the NCOES, the Sergeant Major's Academy, and also get my undergrad degree at the same time, because I didn't choose to do it sooner. And so if there's one thing I could say is, I'd say, Derik, go to college and just get it done.
I love it. Last question. If anyone wants to reach out to you because of this podcast, something that they heard, what would be the best way to do that? And is there any way that someone could add value to any of your missions that you're currently on right now?
People can reach out to me. I'm on Facebook. I don't use monikers or strange names or whatever that would be titles. It's Derik Kearns. Luckily, if you look me up on Global, there's only one of me. There's no numerals or anything with my name. So my parents were super awesome and spelled my name strangely, but just as it appears is how it's spelled. So Derik.a.kearns.mail, that's me. And if anybody is going to be in the Bliss area for the next 14 to 16 months, that's where I'm going to be soon. By all means, please reach out. Or if anyone has anything they want to hit me up about, they can feel free to do so at their convenience.
Derik, brother, it's been an absolute honor and a privilege, and I can't wait for you to get stationed to DC next.
If I get to see it in person sooner than later, I'd love it. If you guys are ever anywhere near, I'm more than willing to take a road trip to come see it. Thank you for inviting me on. This is unexpectedly fun, not just to get to talk to you, but to do a podcast.
Yeah, first one.
It was great to see you. Thank you. And appreciate it.
Yeah, brother. Have a good night.